Today's edition of Things Gun Companies Do that drive me absolutely crazy. So Exhibit A is the Sig Sauer P365 family. It's a big family. There's a lot of parts in it. There's a lot of frame sizes. You got 365s and 365Xs and XLs and X macros and 380s and SAS, and they've got the new AXG Legion macro. Okay, so first of all, the metal framed AXG Legion macro, not the same dimensions, not compatible with any of our macro holsters. But the P365, its trigger guard is 0.398 wide, approximately. The P365X macro, its trigger guard is 0.543 or 0.545 wide. Similar in overall appearance, similar-ish trigger guard profiles, totally different dimensions, completely non-interchangeable in holsters. And also, the 365X and XL have the SIG proprietary rail that has no cross slot, and the macro has a 1913 Picatinny rail. And some companies like Wilson Combat have recently released a version that takes essentially this frame with the large trigger guard and scabs this undersized rail on it to make a perfect hybrid of features that doesn't fit in holsters. It's pretty mind-boggling. The Springfield Hellcat is the same way. You have the Hellcat, you have the Hellcat RDP, and then you have the Hellcat Pro. Now, the Hellcat and the Hellcat RDP are basically the same thing. The RDP just has a bunch of extra crap you don't need on it. The Hellcat trigger guard is quite slender, and it measures out about 0.407, 0.408. The Hellcat Pro, which once again, very similar profile to the trigger guard, 0.510, and also thicker this way and thicker here. And so when we're talking about compact firearms, like P365s, like Hellcats, like G43s, it's very common when you have very subcompact guns that as the bulk of the weight of the firearm is in the magazine, in the grip, above the belt line, that the gun will be tippy. And the shorter the muzzle length is, the less ballast you have below the belt line, the more that tippiness is an issue. We call this the keel principle. Just like the keel on a sailing boat, that dagger board is down in the water and gives you that vertical stability and keeps the whole thing from tipping. The problem is when companies design things like this, like the Hellcat, a lot of customers aren't aware you can't safely put a Hellcat in a Hellcat Pro holster. The difference in trigger guard dimensions will mean that the smaller Hellcat will have no retention at all. The trigger guard will not even engage with the molded in retention point on a Hellcat Pro holster, and it will not be safe to carry, not safe to use. Not the case necessarily when you talk about light bearing holsters, because at that point, the trigger guard on both these firearms is simply inside the light pass-through channel, but the rail specs are different, and so obviously the positioning of the light in relation to the slide and trigger guard of the gun is going to be different, so you can't necessarily interchange these things. And certainly, because the 1913 Picatinny rail on the macro and the SIG proprietary rail on the P365, P365X, and P365XL, also the P365 Rose, which is a P365XL with cosmetic differences, but they just call it a P365 Rose, but it's actually an XL. Those require two completely different versions of the TLR7 Sub Light with different rail clamps, different keys, and everything. They're not remotely interchangeable. So every time this kind of thing comes up, it's obvious to me that the people who are choosing these naming conventions and designing these gun models are not doing any thinking about how to disambiguate their parts in the wild and make it easy for customers to make sure they have appropriate accessories for their firearm and to make it hard to mix it up. Now, the whole system is modular. In the P365, you can take the fire control unit out. You can put it in any combination of things you want. And that's totally cool, except the more confusing, similar-ish permutations you make, the more you virtually guarantee that a significant number of customers are going to have trouble with it. They're going to have weird cross-compatibility problems, and they're going to be frustrated, and at worst, they could be unsafe. So, SIG, stop it.